To welcome you out to our second panel discussion today. Appreciate you students being here and faculty and staff. We have an esteemed group of panelists that will engage us in the topic of effectively communicating with public and elected officials. So let me introduce each of them. What's fun about our panel is that we have a range of individuals in terms of the electorate that they represent. We have a school board member, a city council member, the House minority leader for the state of Utah, and then also a representative from Senator Mike Lee's office at the federal level. Let me begin in no particular order then and introduce each of them. And if the panelists would maybe give a little wink or wave to the crowd so they know who you are. First of all, we have Brian S. King, who's the Utah House Minority Leader. Brian graduated from the University of Utah, and at that point we don't need to become too alarmed about things. He's going to be okay on campus here. In the College of Law in 1985, where he won the college's moot court competition. Brian's practiced law in Salt Lake City for 30 years now. Most of that time he has represented individuals and healthcare providers litigating against health, life, and disability insurers and self-funded employee benefit plans. The work usually involves the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA. He has lectured across the country and written frequently on the topic. Mr. King was invited to testify before the Department of Labor in Washington, D.C. regarding proposed changes to ERISA's claims and appeals procedures. He has been lead counsel in dozens of trials and appeals involving health, life, and disability claims. Mr. King has also been lead counsel for plaintiffs in over a dozen class actions, mostly involving ERISA cases. He has represented clients before the U.S. Supreme Court and in many federal circuit and district courts across the country. He is past president and current member of the Board of Governors of the Utah Association for Justice. Brian's also a member of Public Justice, the Center for Justice and Democracy, and Public Citizen, all tremendous groups that do much to protect defend, and safeguard our civil justice system. In 2008, Brian was elected to the Utah State House of Representatives as the Democratic representative for District 28 in Salt Lake City. He served on the Joint Redistricting Committee for the 2011 redistricting process and is a member of the House Judiciary and Revenue and Taxation Standing Committees. He also serves on the Executive Offices and Criminal Justice Appropriations Subcommittee, the Constitutional Defense Council, the Constitutional Revision Commission, and the Judicial Conduct Commission for the state of Utah. So we'd like to welcome Brian King here with us. Our second panelist is Jody Sundberg. So Jody is a member of the Alpine School Board. Jody has been an elected member of the Alpine School Board of Education since 1999. She served as board chair for 6 years and is currently in her third year as vice chair. Jody is also serving on the board of directors for the Utah School Boards Association and has served as president of this association. Currently, she's been elected to serve on the board of directors for the National School Board Association and is in her third year. Jody's passion for all children having access to knowledge through education has influenced her involvement in public school leadership. She has been married to Jay Sundberg of Orem for 36 years, and they have 4 children and are expecting their 13th grandchild in June. Jody served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Australia Perth mission. She loves reading, walking, golfing, and traveling, but mostly she loves her sweet grandchildren who call her JoJo. So thank you, Jody, for being with us. Mr. Derek Brown is with us. He comes from the office of Senator Mike Lee. Derek serves as Deputy Chief of Staff to U.S. Senator Mike Lee in Washington, D.C. Previously, Derek was a member of the of the Utah House of Representatives, where he served as Vice Chair of the Rules Committee, on the Business and Labor Committee, and on the Law Enforcement Committee. He's a graduate of BYU. He received his JD from Pepperdine School of Law, where he was the editor-in-chief of the Pepperdine Law Review. Derek later clerked for Judge Ruggero Aldisert. Did I get that close? Close enough. Close enough. Of the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, and then practiced constitutional and appellate law in Washington, D.C. Derek has also served as chief counsel to Senator Robert Bennett in Washington, D.C., and later as CEO of a national production company. He currently is on the board of trustees for the Hale Theater and on the advisory board for Intermountain Home Care. He's taught communications law at BYU as an adjunct professor since 2007 and is a PhD candidate in political science at the University of Utah. He and his wife have 4 children. And then finally, Matt Bean, who is a member of the Linden City Council. Matt was elected to that position in 2011. Prior to his council service, he was a member of the city's planning commission for 6 years. He's a financial controller by profession, having worked in public accounting, technology, and banking, and currently is a professor here at BYU. He graduated from the University of Utah and returned later for an additional degree from BYU. He and his wife are the parents of 5 children. So if you'd join me in welcoming this esteemed panel, I'd appreciate that. Now, our format for today will be as follows. We'll give each of our panelists an opportunity to present some of their ideas on effective communication with public officials. We'll give them about 5 to 7 minutes each, and then following that, I'll follow up with some questions, and then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A for each of you. So as they're presenting their ideas, we invite you to jot down those questions that you'd like to know the answers to. We'll go ahead and just work down from the speaker's right to left and sort of move through in that direction, if that's okay.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it. Appreciate being with you today. This is a great forum to address some important issues and maybe learn a few things, even those of us on the panel. I would hope as you engage yourselves in the future with public officials that you would do so with courage and that you'd do so with a sense that you can make a difference. And assume the best of those individuals that you work with, whether elected or appointed, and of the citizens that you may be working with or that may have opposing views. Most people spend a fair amount of time trying to educate themselves regarding the issues, and they deserve our respect. Make sure your criticisms, if you have any of current issues, are constructive and well thought out, and know your subject before you come before a body, whether it's, again, a city council, a school board, the legislature, or even leaving comments with a senator or Congress, member of Congress, or meeting them. And always try to look at the big picture. That's what elected officials and others try to do in balancing difficult needs for those that they serve. Rally others to support you. If it's more evident that there are many people who have the same views that you do and you'd like to effect some kind of change, then find others that support your views. And try to understand the ramifications if there's a funding issue involved. Because as you can imagine, when there are dollars, especially taxpayer dollars involved, that makes the issue much more important to understand and thoroughly vet. Be succinct, be conscious of your time that you've been given, and use varied methods of communication. For your generation, you're very used to sending text messages, maybe sending emails sometimes, maybe coming before a group and speaking, and you'll probably need to use all those as you communicate. And remember in the end that the idea of fairness is really a subjective thing. What an elected official, for instance, believes is fair may be different even than one of his or her fellow members of a council or what the citizens believe. And try to prepare well, again, as you come before a group so that you'll be heard and that when you leave, you can leave something for a panel to consider. Just one short experience that occurred before our council. One time a member of the east side of our city came before us with a list of prepared grievances. And she was respectful. She did come prepared. She took the time that we gave her, which usually for us as a small city is pretty open-ended. And that's not always the case, however. And she felt like she was pretty certain in most of her assertions about what was going on in the city. But it became evident when she was finished and the mayor responded to some of her concerns and other council members responded that she had not done her homework. And we were able to help her understand some issues and encourage her as a member of the community to become more involved if she felt, to run for city council or mayor and have her voice heard even more. And so again, I hope all of you will make time to do that. And it's interesting, I think probably for most of us here, we didn't necessarily come to our positions with a predetermined plan in place. Sometimes it just works out, and it depends on how involved you've been in your communities. Sometimes you'll have people come to you and ask you if you'd like to be more involved, and that can be a great way to get that going. Thanks.
Okay, grab this one. There we go. Great to be with you here, and I see some of my students from my communications law course, and so there will be no heckling, especially from you in the front row. So, I was thinking, you know how, have you seen like on, Jimmy Fallon, some of these other shows, they have like celebrities reading mean tweets? I kind of thought I'd do that with a couple of emails that I got when I was a member of the House of Representatives. Just some of the, I'll pull one of them. Last night I just sort of thought through what were some of the really fun topics that we dealt with. And so I'll do a little censoring here, but let me just read one. And this is sort of, since this is about how to interact with public officials, I mean, what better way to describe that than to show you how not to do it? Okay, so here it goes. Representative Brown, I should have known from the fact that I have only received one reply from you to a concern I wrote about that you don't give a damn about what your constituents think about the legislation before you. I'm on campus. I probably shouldn't have said that. I probably should have censored that. I know. It's for a rookie legislator, you sure learned in a hurry to lick the jackboots of the party leaders. What else? Let's see here. We now live in an oligarchy with information restricted as much as China and Libya. With the low voter turnout, your opponents don't have to rally much to help run you out of office. And then he proceeds to talk about how the person I beat when I won, he helped that person. Love always, Robin B. No, I'm kidding. He didn't say that part, but then he signed his name. So anyway, this is very instructive. So let's just go through this. A couple of quick things. First of all, it is good writing in the sense that if those of you who are in journalism know you start with a punch. Get the attention. So he certainly did that well. A couple of just thoughts. Let's see. Four-letter words probably not the best way to work with an elected official. Anytime you want to compare the United States to, say, Libya, and insist that Libya sort of has one-upped us in any given subject matter, probably not the best approach. And then to, you like that?
The reference to jackboot was nice.
So and as just as a little bit of background, so I served in the House of Representatives with Representative King. Notice I said we're licking the jackboots of the party leaders. So they couldn't say that to you because you are the party leader, really. But what's funny is that this issue, and he'll remember this issue, but this was one of these issues where you just kind of have to laugh. And it was funny for me because before I served in the House of Representatives, I was legal counsel for U.S. Senator, and in my role, I was sort of like the guy behind the scenes. Like I could go to the senator and say, okay, here's this piece of legislation. I think it's really solid. Here's the pros, here's the cons. I think you should vote for it. And then I could effectively say, all right, vote for it. Go get him. And then I could walk out of the room, and then he'd take the slings and arrows. And so for me, it was really kind of an interesting experience to all of a sudden be on the other side of things where I'd cast a vote, and then I'd get home that night and have an email that just is blistering, and I'd read it and go, oh, I'd get to the end and say, Patty Davidson. I'd be like, oh, I know her. She's in the 3rd ward. Yeah, that's Sister Davis, that kind of thing. Yeah, she's the state primary president. And I'm joking, but only a little bit. And part of it, and this is why I want to bring this up.
She knew those words.
Exactly. What's funny, though, is, and this is the point I want to bring up, is that one of I think, the devastating things we've seen as a country is sort of the advent of cable news channels and the shows, because they portray politics as though everyone is always at each other's throat and they hate each other. Representative King and I sat on completely different sides of the political aisle. I mean, there were a lot of issues we did not agree on. And, that being said, we were good friends. I mean, there were more than one time, I think I may have been put in a headlock on the floor of the House. And he exactly, and noogied. No, there wasn't a noogie, but there was a headlock. But the reality is, when the session was over, we disagreed passionately on certain issues. And surprisingly, I think that if you counted up all the votes I cast that entire time, and yours, we probably agreed on 90%, okay? And keep that in mind, we're on very different sides of the political spectrum, and yet 90% of the bills we actually ended up voting on in a similar way. And so keep that in mind when you talk with elected officials, that it's not the Sean Hannity show. You know what I'm saying? It's not the Rachel Maddow show. For the most part, everyone is really good friends. And so when you approach it like this email did with this individual, of sort of, okay, I'm going to put on my boxing gloves and turn on my computer and start, punching, that's really not sort of the way it is. So anyway, just something to keep in mind. One last thing I would advise you, and there's so many things we could say on this, but at some point in your life, the day will come when, and it did for me, where you think to yourself, ooh, I should run for this office. I should run for that office, and the timing will be right. It's all about timing. And when that happens, do it. That's what I would advise you to do it. I have a very good friend who was actually an intern for a member of the Utah House of Representatives many years ago, and he was a senior at Weber State at the time. And at the end of the session, someone said to him, hey, you know what? You ought to run. You ought to run for the House. And there was an incumbent, someone who'd been in that seat for a while. And he sort of mulled it over, and after a while said, I'm gonna give it a shot. I really should do this. And he was a Republican running against a Republican, and in the convention beat out the Republican. And he served for 7 or 8 years in the House of Representatives. He now works with me in the office of Senator Mike Lee. But the bottom line is he was in his 20s and had just literally got his diploma, and then won the election a few months later, and served, and until recently he was the chair of the Revenue and Taxation Committee for the state of Utah. So anyway, bottom line is you don't have to wait until you're retired to serve. I mean, this is someone who is a good friend of both of ours who did this in his 20s. And so when that day comes, take advantage of it. So I think I've said enough, and
You want me to take this now?
exactly, take it here.
Brian King's my name. I appreciate the opportunity to come down here to the Y. I am a University of Utah graduate twice, and am rooting mightily for my Utes tonight against Duke. We'll see how that turns out. I'm a little nervous, but I should have more of my heart with the Y, in the sense that for many, many years and continuing, a ton of my money goes down in the form of tithing dollars to this institution. And we have, my wife and I have 4 daughters, and our third got real close. I mean, this close to coming to the Y, and then she repented and came to the U. But she's affianced to a Y student right now. So anyway, I thought that some of these, I do want to reiterate, Derek and I are good friends, and we had, I remember, and he remembers this too, on the last night of the session, I think it was Derek's first or second year, we had this heated conversation in the House lounge right behind the chamber, in which we were just nose to nose, and he was saying, wah, 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 and I was going, ah, ah, ah. And
It was a conversation. It was a full out.
it was but we are good friends, and we've gotten together since he's left the legislature. We go to lunch. We really have great respect and affection for each other, and this is something that makes a big difference between D.C. and Salt Lake City. And I think it's true, as Matthew indicated, and you'll hear also from Jody, that when you're talking about politics on the local level and the county level and the state level, it works best when you have mutual respect. You've got to recognize, as Matthew said, that you have to assume the best of people. If you assume, like this email that Derek read, that we're on the take, or that we are acting in bad faith, that we aren't possessed of the best motives, that we are not doing as much as we can the right thing for the right reason, or trying to do the right thing for the right reason. If you assume something other than that, you're going to get into trouble. What people don't recognize is the degree to which there's great sacrifice involved in public service. And I don't say that to pat myself on the back or anybody here on the back, but it's true. I mean, it's hard to do, and it's hard to do well. And during the legislative session that we just finished, we went from about January 25th to about March 12th. I think most of the members of the legislature, I certainly put myself in this category, we end up getting about 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. Seriously. I mean, it's very grueling. And in large part, that's just because it's condensed into 45 days. I've now gotten back in the habit of sleeping my normal 12 hours a day. But during that time frame, it's hard. And I'm a practicing lawyer. I have my own law practice, and it's taken a hit because of the time I've served in the legislature. And again, I don't say that. I love what I do. I wouldn't trade it for anything. But don't assume that the people that you're communicating with who are involved in public service are doing anything but their very best for the right reasons, because almost always they are. Occasionally you'll get a few bad apples, but that's not very common. I think that what you want to do then is approach people with real courtesy and respect as you communicate with them. One thing that's very important from my perspective is please be concise. Please get to the point. And please don't give me a rant. I'm much more interested in why you think what you do than in how strongly you feel. Okay? I'm not as a public official, as an elected official, so interested in the fact that, and this is again something that is illustrated by the email that Derek read. There's no question about how strongly that person who wrote Derek the email felt, right? We all know that. That counts for little when I don't know really whether the reasons that you feel that way are valid or not. I'm looking for the reasons that you take the position that you do. Because if you're, again, as we heard from Matthew, if you haven't done your homework as my constituent and you're writing me under the misapprehension that Bill 123, HB 123, is about A, B, and C when it's actually not about A, B, and C, it's about X, Y, and Z, I want to know that, because if you're talking about apples and I'm dealing with oranges, I'm going to disregard that email. If we're both on the same page and you're talking about apples and I'm dealing with apples, I'm going to listen more carefully to what you have to say and why you feel the way you do. So I think it's important in terms of doing your homework to recognize that you need to be talking about facts and about the reality of the situation when you deal with the public official, as opposed to just venting to them. Again, being concise is important simply because during a legislative session, and this is not uncommon, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you, I'll get home at the end of the day at 8 or 9 o'clock p.m. after meetings, and I will be facing 70, 80, 100, 150 emails from people. Now, I try and go through all my emails. Quite honestly, my intern, I had a great intern from the Y, by the way, and I'm calling him out by name, Craig Yagawa. Do any of you know Craig? Boy, this guy is good. Great guy, good friend. He was so helpful for me during the session, and Craig would read these emails and he'd say, here are your constituent emails, King. Here are the non-constituent emails, because I have to pay attention to emails that come from my constituents in District 28 up in Salt Lake. You can write me if you're not a constituent. I'm happy to hear from you. But the chances are, especially during the session, I'm not going to be able to pay a lot of attention to that. On the other hand, when people write to me from my district, I make a very concerted effort to make sure that I get back to them, that I respond. And so at the end of the day, I'll have 20 or 30 emails that I'll be responsible for responding to. It takes real time, but I try and do it. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 or 4 days to get back to people. But when I'm dealing with that volume of communication, I need you to get to the point. Please give me what you're saying in a paragraph or two. Make it concise, make it fact-based, make it respectful. Give me your best shot in terms of the reasons for how you feel the way you do. I'll do everything I can as an elected official to try and get back to you with a substantive response that deals with the issues that you've raised. Let me see what else I've got. Oh, I have written down here, written communications are better than verbal communications. I think that's true for the most part. If you email me or text me, it's better from my perspective than if you call me. Phone calls, verbal communications in that sense are much less efficient than written communications. Written communications require us as human beings to focus more and be more organized and thoughtful about what we're saying. It's just in the nature of the communication, right? We can ramble on when we're talking about verbal, face-to-face kind of interactions. When you're forced to put something in writing, you have to get to the point. You have to be coherent and thoughtful, hopefully. The exception to that rule is if you want to come see me in person. If you want to come see me in person, that's the most effective way to communicate. The problem with it is you guys and I have limited time. I can't see in person every person that would like to see me, and not many people who want to communicate with me really want to take their time to come see me in person either. So if you want to communicate with me as an elected official, generally texts or emails are best. Less good is phone calls, and if it's something really important that you care very much about and you really want to take some time to travel to me in my office and see me, spend 15 or 20 minutes with me, I'm happy to do that too. That's the most effective way of communicating. So, thank you.
No.
I think mine was the same way. Okay, now.
Test.
There you go. No, I think you just got to hold it down the whole time.
Okay. I am really glad to be here to talk to you. A couple of things. After my good colleagues have spoken, I have a few things to say. First of all, I have the greatest respect for Representative King and all that he has done for public education and education up on the Hill. He has been a very good listening ear. However, I do have one thing I want to say about Utah versus BYU. I am a true blue BYU fan. All of our children are BYU fans, even my son who played baseball for Utah, sorry. In fact, the first words out of our kids' mouth as they were growing up was, "Boo Utah." So, sorry, but
Sad. That is so sad.
I still have great respect for him. Another thing I want to say is women are very important on the political scene. To be able to have the personality and position of a woman is very, very important, whether it be on Capitol Hill, in the city government, school boards, in our nation. Women are very important because they bring a different caliber of thought and approach to issues. Even in our bios today, we talked about different things, but at the end, mine got really soft and fuzzy, warm and fuzzy about being a grandma and being called JoJo and those kinds of things. And that's really important in political decision making. I agree with my colleagues here about being succinct and being kind. Get to the matters quickly and kind in your thoughts. And make sure that you have the facts. And if you don't, be prepared to hear them, the facts of what are really involving the political decision or any decision. But it's very, very important that you engage in the process. That is really important, that we hear from our people that we serve. Very, very key. As a school board member, we hold our meetings in a public meeting. And we give time for public comment in those meetings. And we hear everything from taxes to boundary changes, from standards and testing to calendar issues. And when you think about when it comes to your child or your neighborhood or your money, you become pretty passionate when you come to speak to the board. There's various ways that people have come to talk to us in this comment time during board meetings. I've been yelled at. I've had people cry. I've had people that were very calm and sincere. And so you go through a range of emotions as you're listening to people. And we try very hard as we sit on our dais at the front to not roll our eyes or sigh or do, because we appreciate everything that's being said for the most part, if you do it in a respectful manner. Emails. I want to talk about that just for a minute. Can be very effective or very destructive. I want to share a couple of emails on some boundary changes that we're just going through because we have a new high school that will be opening in our district in 2016. High school boundary changes are the worst. And you know who it's the worst for? Parents. Kids are pretty adaptable. Parents, it is the worst. So we're getting all of this information and even emails saying, I can't believe you made this decision about the boundary change, when there's no decision made. There's information is just going out. But there's a couple of ways to approach your thoughts and ideas, and I want to share a couple. Here's one. School board members, I have heard a lot of information going around about 2 boundary proposals for the new Lehigh High School, and I feel I need to voice my opinion about the subject. And then she goes through and talks about the different plans and what she likes. And then she said, at the end, thank you, and very thoughtful. She talks about the blue plan would give the new high school time to settle in and develop a strong base before growing to its full capacity, and goes through all these different things, very thoughtful. In the end, she says, thank you for all your hard work and the time you have dedicated to making this decision. Sincerely, so-and-so. So, in the midst of making this boundary change for the high school, we had a group of parents who wanted to also make a boundary shift for the junior high schools in the area, which was not what we were working on at the time and had not been working on. And like I said, boundary changes are a very difficult thing. So doing both of those at the same time would have been just a little bit too much to do to all the people. But they wanted a boundary change for the junior high. So they developed a rally, invited a couple of legislators, because they wanted the legislators to tell us what to do with our boundary change. Okay, first rule, make sure that you go to the person who has the greatest power of decision making over your concern. It's not good for you to come to me as a school board, even though I have schools in Linden, to talk to me about the new buildings that they're putting up across from your park or whatever. That is a decision for Linden. Same for school board. Going to the legislators to say, we want you to come in and tell the board what to do with these boundaries is a very difficult pill to swallow for a school board member. Anyway, they held the rally. They invited the 2 legislators, invited school board members, and we had our school board member go who represented that area. During the course of the rally, one of the legislators kind of got into the rally and said some misinformation about a subject that happened 6 months before with a CDA that we had done with the district. The CDA, if you're not familiar, is it's a development kind of thing that where money is given through taxes to help buildings or businesses or whatever. In that meeting, because of the angst of the parents in this rally, I got this email. How could you? Your actions have shown you have zero interest in children and their education. How can you make that decision? I am sick that such an uneducated and naive decision was made with taxpayer money to choose retail over children. What did they promise you? The only possible explanation is they promised you something amazing to vote for, such an asinine proposal. Step down. You are not fit for this position. You have lost respect from hundreds and hundreds of people. You want to avoid emotionally charged parents? Well, you just threw yourself into an angry crowd of parents who want answers and change. You need to step down. As a resident of We Will Make Change Happen. Okay, I got this sitting in my family room with my family, and I'm reading this thing, and I'm thinking, what is going on at that rally? So be very careful at how you approach people in your engagement when they have been elected to make the decisions for your area. The last thing I want to say really quickly is social media. Most of you, that's how you will engage, is through social media. Be very careful. I know that there is a thing that says IRL. I just learned about this because I'm not really that key on social media, but in real life. And I want to tell you something, that social media, Facebook, is real life. It's in real life. So when you put things out there that you wouldn't say face to face because you could do it on Twitter or Facebook or something else, it's in real life, and you do a lot of damage to the cause that you have. I had people attack my family. I've had people attack my family, my faith, and even the color of lipstick I wear. So you need to be very, very careful. It's never had that happen to you, right? That's probably because you wear a good color.
Thank you.
Make sure that you engage in a responsible way. And with the closing, I'd just like to say, from the newest Disney movie that just came out, that gave us great advice, be courageous and be kind.
Okay. Thank you to each of our panelists. We appreciate those initial insights. If I may, let me follow up with just a couple of questions. So it's interesting. We have a spectrum of representation from local to state to national levels. And I'm wondering if you could comment on how effective communication differs at each of these levels. So think about at the state level, or excuse me, at the local level, state, and then federal level. Yeah, please.
Let me just make a quick comment on this. We, in the office of Senator Lee, for where I work, we have, I mean, the number of phone calls and emails and, you know, we even still get some faxes, which is kind of funny. I'm not sure what to do with them, but we get a lot of stuff that comes in. It's a lot of these same exact things apply to dealing with a member of Congress. You have to be aware that, like, for instance, Senator Lee represents almost 3 million people. And so we have a lot of people that call up and say, I demand to meet with the senator. And we say, well, we have a broad, you know, we've got like 40 people that work with the senator, and we've got a lot of them doing different subject matters. And some people get really angry that he won't individually meet with them. But that is what the staff is for. But what I would recommend is the one thing that's unique about this, if you ever really want to get an issue discussed and heard with a member of Congress, what you do is find out who in that office deals with that issue and talk to her. That's what you do. Because, and I almost hesitate to sort of give this little secret out because it could make my life a lot more difficult. But, I mean, in our office, we have a half a dozen or so interns. A lot of them are from, but they're great interns. And some are from the University of Utah as well. And so, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. We actually take them from all the schools, and our interns get these calls all day long, and they're fascinating calls, and I keep sort of joking about the fact that one day we should record them and make like a best of album, because some of them are just great. But what I would recommend, I think the single best piece of advice I can give you is if you have an issue about education or about something involving, you know, pick it, Iran or immigration or whatever, find out in the office who deals with that. Who is it that deals with that issue? Who is their subject matter expert? Because we do have a subject matter expert on foreign affairs in our office. We do have someone that deals primarily with financial services. We have someone that deals with the military, someone who deals with mostly immigration, those kind of things. Find out who that person is. Talk with that person. I mean, I feel bad because we do have hundreds of calls a day that come in where someone will talk and talk and talk and talk to an intern who is, you know, and at the end of the calls, all of our interns sort of recall, you know, sort of recount, okay, we have a form where they fill out, here's what the call was about, here's what they said, here's the recommendation. And that's very helpful from my standpoint. But from your standpoint, if you really want to get the message across, find out who that person is and talk with that person. That's probably, I mean, and it's different because Senator Lee has 40 people that we're managing that deal with these issues. But those of us who serve in these local positions, by and large, we have no staff. We have 45 days a year. In the legislature, we had one intern 45 days a year. Generally, it was shared with someone else. So that's probably the single biggest difference I would highlight.
Representative King.
Thank you. I think that, and Jody and I were just talking about the fact that a lot of that, how you answer that question is going to depend in large part on two things. Number one, the number of people that you represent. As Derek said, Senator Lee represents 3 million people almost. I, as a member of the House of Representatives, represent about 38,000 people. Our state senators represent between 90 and 100,000 people. So and Jody was saying that she represents about 20,000 folks in her school district. And Matthew, I don't know, I mean, Linden City is what?
11,000.
11,000 people. So I mean, you know, that's the first question is how many folks are being represented? And number two, what kind of resources do you have to respond? The more people I think you have that you represent, the more likely it is that you're never going to be able to have a meaningful conversation with Senator Lee over the phone or in a one-to-one context. It just isn't going to happen very often. So you got to have effective writing skills and be able to write concisely and persuasively and get through to him, and hopefully you'll get a response that way. But for me, it's a little more likely, and I'm sure this is true for Matthew and for Jody, it's even more likely than for me. You can pick up the phone perhaps and talk to us. I, again, don't think that's the best way of communicating simply because it's not clear and concise generally. But I think that the smaller the representation is, the more likely it is that you're going to get some personal hands-on attention. And that's what you want. But having said that, any constituent who calls me and says, especially out of the session, can I have a time to talk with you? Can I come down and see you? I'll always give them some time. It may not be tomorrow, but it'll be within the next week or 10 days. And you can come talk to me. And I'm sure that with the exception of Senator Lee, who just logistically can't do that, representing 3 million people, I'm sure that's true for Jody and for Matthew, too. Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, because, and that gets back to the second question about what resources, it's not just a question of how many people do you represent, it's a question of what resources do you have available to help you meet the needs of your constituency.
Jody or Matthew, do you want to comment?
I do. I just want to comment on one thing. And the thing about a school board that's different than an elected official in the legislature and city council, well, councils are probably more akin to a school board. But I'm elected from a group of about 20,000. But I represent on the school board the entire district. So from Orem to the point of the mountain, from Provo Canyon to Cedar Fort. So that's a larger number. But I cannot make a decision. So if you come to me and say, I want this to happen, I cannot make that happen. I'm just one of 7 board members. And until we have 4 board members that make the will of the board, nothing moves. So you coming to me, I can be the advocate for you. But I am the school board member for the entire district. So.
And just one quick comment as it relates to a city council, say for instance, or a mayor, we influence each other on those bodies. And so if you were to find out which council member or whether the mayor happens to have some expertise in the area that you're interested in, that would be a good place to go, and because one person or group influences another, and often that's how decisions are made also.
Okay, thank you. Several of you have mentioned that to effectively communicate, passion gets you started, but that specific information, details in a well-reasoned argument really make the difference. Can you comment on whose responsibility it is to become informed? Does that lie with the constituents, with the media, or with the elected official? And then maybe give us some insight into how elected officials do their part in that process. Jody, start with you.
Thank you. You know, that's changed for us on school boards over the years. I'm in my 17th year, so I've seen quite a bit of change. And it used to be that we could attend our meetings twice a month and all will go well. And, you know, the engagement of parents, just listen to what their teachers said and their principals said, and all was happy. But that has changed over the years, and there has been such a demand for the communication back and forth, not just to be an advocate, but to have that communication back and forth. So it was very important that the district became engaged in the community, as well as the community becoming engaged in serving in schools with PTAs, school community councils on district level type committees, etc. But it was really a responsibility came out from the district to reach out to our constituents with all sorts of social media. We now have an app. There's an app for Alpine School District, and other ways to get our message out to the people, so that they understood the direction we were going, and to have in parent involvement, even on the district level.
You identified three things there on this, Jerry. So I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, you've got to have informed media, you've got to have informed representatives, and you've got to have informed constituents. And only when you have those three things working in concert are you going to have the best product come out of this public policy making process. I work hard to get informed on the bills that we are dealing with, but quite honestly, the volume of materials that come before us require that I rely on others for information. Sometimes it's my administrative assistant, sometimes it's my intern, sometimes it's lobbyists, sometimes it's my colleagues in the legislature, committee hearings. I'll sometimes walk into committee hearings having a full agenda of stuff that we're scheduled to hear, and I will have prepared for all 5 bills that are scheduled to be heard on the agenda by reading the bill and trying my best to understand them, and the bill sponsor will get up on the first item on the agenda and say, I have a substitute prepared. And the substitute will be with the same bill title, and it'll deal generally with the same thing, but oftentimes it will vary substantially from what I prepared for. And that's perfectly permissible. You may argue it's not the best way to get your bill passed, to sort of sandbag the members of the committee and then throw something up that's quite different. That's another matter, but it happens all the time. And my point is, there are a lot of times when I'm not really informed the way I'd like to be as a representative about the stuff that in the next 20 minutes I'm going to hear all about and then be asked to vote on one way or the other in terms of passing it out of committee with a favorable recommendation or not. That's a tough position to be in for me, but it's also inevitable, especially when we have such a condensed session. I rely on a lot of other people to get informed. You, as constituents, when you're talking to your public officials, many times they'll know the issue that you're talking to them about inside and out, and they'll have information that you don't have. But many times, you'll be able to present to us as elected officials information that from your perspective, you have a lot more knowledge about than I do. I'm a generalist, I'm a lawyer, and yet as a legislator, I'm asked to consider bills that deal with soup to nuts, A to Z, you know. I know a lot about a very narrow slice of the law. There are a lot of other people in the legislature and in our community at large that know a lot more about any particular bill than I do. I want to hear from you on those things. I want you to tell me facts. I'm not interested so much, again, in how strongly you feel as I am interested in knowing why you feel the way you do based on your personal knowledge and facts as opposed to ideology. So that's all I'd say on that.
Can I just add one thing? I think it's vital if you're going to contact someone in the elected official realm that you've done your homework. Now, a lot of people don't, and that's okay because we don't expect everyone to know everything about the process and where things are. But sometimes just a simple Google search will help you understand where things are. And I mean, let me give you just a brief example. I got an email yesterday from some commissioners in the state who were all up in arms about the fact that Obama is going to outlaw a specific type of ammunition for a specific type of weapon. You know, and they went on and on about how this was the most awful thing. I can't believe he'd ever do this. And what I wanted to say was, that is so 2 weeks ago. Because he was, in fact, going to do that. And then the administration, for whatever reason, decided they weren't going to about 2 weeks ago. And then the issue kind of subsided. But I just thought it was interesting to have elected officials contact me and say, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. You know, a simple Google search before they sort of shot off these emails and got everyone whipped up in a frenzy would have helped them realize, oh wait, that really was so 2 weeks ago and this is sort of a non-issue now. So that's the importance of just doing your homework so that it helps the elected official know what it is they can do to help. So.
Okay, great. All right, I think at this point I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for questions from the audience. So I have a microphone. I'll bring that around. If there are any of you who would like to follow up with specific questions, go ahead and just raise your hand and I'll find you.
So is there any specific example one of you could share where effective communication has made a difference in influencing your decision, or a group of various constituents together have voiced, and that has changed your decision?
That happens all the time. All the time. To me. Probably doesn't happen to, it never happened to Derek, because he knew all this stuff. No, it goes back to my point earlier. We are asked to vote on such a wide array of things that I know nothing about for the most part. I mean, I like to think of myself as a reasonably intelligent guy, but I all the time get emails that provide information from people I trust. And it's got to come from a trustworthy source. It helps if I know them. But for example, there was a bill that Senator Dayton was running in this last session that talked about combining radiation oversight and regulation, the regulatory board over radiation, with environmental, other types of environmental waste. And I started getting emails about this when it was still in the Senate, because it started in the Senate. Margaret Dayton's a senator, not a House member. And so, look, I don't even pay attention. Quite honestly, I'm not even going to pay attention to what's going on in the Senate until and unless it comes to the House. Why? Because it may never come to the House. Why should I waste my time messing around with Senate bills until they pass the Senate? This hadn't passed the Senate. I keep getting emails, though, and they're from doctors for the most part within my district. I have a ton of MDs that I represent. I represent in Salt Lake City everything north of I-80 and everything east of 13th East, for those of you who know Salt Lake. Most of the University of Utah is in my district. And they were teaching at the U or acting in some capacity at the University of Utah, filled with detailed information about why this was a bad idea. I read every one of them carefully. I wrote back and said, thank you so much for this information. Pretty much my whole position on that bill was dictated by what informed constituents were telling me on the facts about how bad this bill was. Passed anyway, but I voted against it.
And I had one where there was a specific issue involving guns and law enforcement and their ability to approach someone who is carrying a weapon and ask them questions. And there was a bill that I didn't see any problems with, and then I got an email from a member of law enforcement who said, Representative Brown, that may look good, but the reality is, here's what it really looks on the street when I pull up in a cop car and this is what happens. And he says, I promise you, it's not going to work that way. And it sort of made me go, wait a minute, what am I missing? And after really then talking with more law enforcement officials, I ended up changing my position on it. But it was because of a well thought out email from someone in that subject matter who said, look, I can tell you from firsthand experience that what you may be hearing and the reality is totally different. And so that's a perfect example of what I think everyone's talked about in terms of really effective communication.
Let me just give you two examples. One, on that boundary change, there was a group in a very small island that this boundary change affected, and that those families came together very respectfully and showed us the problem with one of the boundary changes. And hence, we actually made a different change in the boundary to accommodate this one little island of people. The other thing on the state level with legislators, there are school board members, superintendents, and others who form an education coalition who work tirelessly through the legislative session and all year long in sending information about bills to either the Senate or the House that affect public education. And for the most part, have seen good changes to bills because of this group working together in advocacy for education.
I just have a question about how do you guys communicate and like school board to local legislation to state legislation on issues that affect like particular communities? For example, in the Alpine School District, there's been an increase of suicide attempts this year. Like, how do you communicate with state legislators to make sure that, or connect even with community members, that things are being done in something like that issue?
That's a good question. And one of the issues, and are you talking about the Lone Peak area? Or and mostly they have been in the Lone Peak area. And so there has been with the Highland, Alpine, Cedar Hills communities working with their city councils, law enforcement, and school officials to try, and church leaders actually, to try to determine things that can happen to stop those issues, as you know, there's been lots of opportunities for parents being brought in and different programs being put into place. So those things are happening all the time. And then as a district, we have 13 municipalities in our district, and we meet regularly with those municipalities. In fact, Linden was just in one of our buildings and grounds maybe a month ago, committee meetings, you know, talking about some issues that they have. And we meet regular, like with Orem City, every other month we meet. So we're constantly having that interaction as well.
I think good legislators really do a good job of making sure that they have personal contacts with the people that you're talking about. I know my school board members in the Salt Lake School District. I had a meeting, I had a bill that dealt with school districts and school district operations during the session. I had my intern call Mikkel Withers, who is the superintendent of the Salt Lake School District, and say, Dr. Withers, will you come up and talk to me about this? And he showed up in my office up at the legislature, and I sat down and I said, Mikkel, here's what I'm thinking about doing. I'd be interested in knowing whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea, what angles or rough edges that we can, you know, deal with if you've got a problem with them, that kind of thing. I know my city councilors, the city councilors for our area. Charlie Luke and I are having lunch on Monday. Charlie's one of the Salt Lake City councilors who is in charge of our area. Ralph Becker, Mayor Becker and I have maintained good contact, generally speaking, although I have a grievance about that, Ralph. But that's critical for good state legislators to know who the key people are about, much like Jody is, you know. I don't know whether Representative Kennedy knows Jody well, but I'll bet he does, and I'll bet she knows him, and I'll bet there's some regular communication, there should be, about concerns that Alpine School District has that Representative Kennedy, representing the Alpine and the Highland area, needs to know about. And if there isn't good communication there on a regular basis, that's a problem. But when I have something come in from Charlie Luke, a phone call or a text or an email, I pay special attention to, because I know he's speaking for more than just, you know, one constituent, although he is a constituent of mine. So.
Okay, well, we've come to an end here. We appreciate those of you that have come and joined us today. Thank you for coming out, and please join me in thanking our panelists one more time.